In the next 31 minutes, you're gonna learn 30 things inside of xTool Creative Space that all laser owners need to know. And now to make it fun, we're gonna have a competition. I would love to know from you how many of these tips you already knew. Let everybody know down in the comments. Now, the goal of all of this is really to help you save time. While the actual time savings is going to vary, hopefully a lot of these tips can speed up either your design process or the actual process of your laser engraving or cutting out. All right, let's get into it. All right, we're gonna start off with some general organization tips. You can actually have multiple canvases within one single file. Meaning maybe you're doing one of my material tests, linked down below, but you're actually wanting to do two of these for whatever reason. Instead of kind of having to move stuff around within one single canvas, you can actually create an entire new canvas to do it. And so actually with my test files, I've got a bunch of different canvases in there. Now xTool's kind of moved these canvases around, but to get to them, you just hit that tab at the top, and then it's gonna drop all those down, and then it's really easy to make new ones if you need it. All right, the next tip has to do with organization of the artwork itself. There's actually two different ways that you can organize things. The first is with layers, and so that is what these color-coded things are at the bottom. When you start a brand new project, you're not gonna have a layer that is already in there. So like if we added some quick text, you can see it automatically adds it to a blue layer, but we can create an entire new layer. You just right click and then select the color that you want. But you can also get access to the layers as well as the objects. And basically each individual thing that you add in is going to be an individual object. You can see it right here on the left, but then you have your full layers right here. And the best way to think about it is the layers are going to be a different operation you're doing with your machine. So let's say instead of doing a quick text, we wanted to cut this out. And again, I'm gonna drop this onto the red layer. So we're gonna select red, come over here to cut, and then we can come over here to blue, and then hit engrave, and then we can do two different operations right there. Now you can also just select the individual objects as well, but if we go back to those test files, then it gets a lot easier when you have a bunch of stuff to be able to select things and move things around. So I can come in here and select my entire text layer. If I click right here, so either I click it, you can see everything is selected. You can also just hit it right here, and then I can make an adjustment to every single thing. Now that's the way I like to organize it, but you can also apply settings to individual objects too. So you can come over here and you can select a different power and a different speed. Just know they're not gonna be color coded, so it's gonna be a little bit easier to get them lost. So I recommend you guys stick with the layers versus just sticking with the objects. The next tip has to do with what happens if you want to adjust the artwork inside of a frame that you're going to cut out, but you're afraid you're going to move that frame. So you can definitely lock an object if you click it, and then you right click, you can do the lock and unlock, or use the keyboard shortcut. But what I find, so let's say I wanted to select all of these right here because I needed to set the power to 100. Right now, if I did that, it's also gonna select the frame, and so that can get annoying. Super easy way to get around that is, again, go back to the layers, click that entire frame layer, and then hit hide right up there. It's still in there, but now it has disappeared from what you are working with, and then it makes it really easy to go back in and select individual stuff as needed. All right, the next tip is a really easy and fast way to put something directly in the middle of your workspace. So first, you are just going to select everything that you want to put in the middle, and then you can start dragging it around. Now, if you hit Command R on a Mac or the equivalent on a PC, you're gonna start seeing we have little guides that have popped up because we've turned on the snapping function inside of the software. So I can just move this around till I get those blue crosshairs on both sides, then everything is directly in the middle. You can turn this on from the settings as well, File, Settings, and then auto snapping. And right there is that keyboard shortcut. And this is handy not just to go to the center, but you can see that it is trying to line itself up with different things that you have on the artboard. So like if you wanted to put this right next to the quick, instead of using all of the alignment tools over here, which still work great, you can just visually align it as well. That's something in pretty much all vector editing software, and that's nice to see inside of here as well. The next one has to do with very, very fine adjustments. Let's say you have this right right here, and I'm going to turn off the auto snapping. And let's say for whatever reason, I just wanted to nudge it just a little bit past this frame. You can definitely zoom in and kind of move this as needed, but if you want to be more exact, just use your arrow keys. And each time you press, you're actually moving it 1 pixel, and you can speed this up, but still be exact if you hold Shift. That's going to move it 10 pixels. Now that I wind up using a ton, especially on the S1 where there is no actual camera. If I am trying to line up artwork to fit within something that's already in there, I will just nudge it around using my arrow keys and the Shift to get it in the exact right spot. So the next tip is how you can run multiple machines at the same time. But if I come up here to this drop down, you can see I've got multiple machines that are in here, and you can have a machine connected to different projects. So you can see I've got my xTool S1 right here. On the tab, it actually tells you what machine you're using. So I've got the F1 Ultra right there, and then I've got the M1 Ultra, which is right over there, and then not in here, but in the shop, I've got my xTool P2, which is also connected. But I can actually start all of these guys running. So I'm gonna go ahead and start all of these really, really fast, and I've got to run and like press buttons. All right, so I got the P2 going, I've got the M1 Ultra going, I've got the F1 Ultra going, and then finally, I've got the S1 going. And what's nice is you can actually see all of these running. Up here on the top right, and sorry, it's gotten a lot louder, you can see here are all the different things that are running and the time left on all the processes. You can quickly stop and pause these as well. And they don't have to be different machines. You could have multiple of the same machine and all manage it from one spot. And there's nothing connected to the computer, but all connected through Wi-Fi. Now, xTool has updated a lot of their vector editing tools, and we're gonna get into those in a minute. But let's say you create something really nice in xTool, but you wanna export it and use it in other software. You can do that. Come up here to File, and then Export as an SVG. The only thing with that is if you have a text, it is going to rasterize that text, meaning when you open it up in other software, you're not gonna be able to edit the text. All right, speaking of vectors, this next category of tips all has to do with vector editing. The first one has to do specifically with text. This one is nice, but let's say I had something a little bit more fancy. So something wild like this. This currently is text, meaning you can come in here and edit it. So we can say this is actually long text. But you might want to turn this into a vector you can actually edit. So what you do is you come over here to Weld, and it's going to rasterize your text for you. And then once it does that, you can double click in and you can edit individual points of your text. Now, this is like a one-way street, so you can't turn this back into normal text. All right, another text tool, and this is going to be a little bit more specific to the M1 Ultra when you're using a pen to draw something out. When you're doing that, you're gonna wanna use a single line font. So you can see with this one, if you do an engrave, it's gonna fill in the space within the text. But if you wanted to have just a single stroke, like if you were gonna actually write it yourself, they have some single line fonts. This is going to be specific to certain fonts. I kind of wish they would give you a category, so it's a little bit easier to find the different ones, but Arizona is actually one of those. And so when I click it over, you can see that we have a single line. And again, to compare it to the non-single line version is the regular version. All right, the next one has to do with the main reason I still use Adobe Illustrator, and that is to do an image trace of a picture. All right, so I just brought in this bear, and I believe this is like a PNG or a JPEG image, but I wanna convert this to a vector because I don't wanna do a raster engrave, I wanna do a nicer vector engrave with better edges. And normally those will be a little bit faster as well. So to do that, you can click on it, come over here to the image. There's a bunch of different ways that you can process it, but the big one is image trace. Click on that, and if I zoom in, you can see that blue is where it is finding the edges. And then you can adjust the threshold, the fuzziness, all that kind of stuff, the noise. And you can even layer it by color. I'll show you an example of that here in a second. But for this, we're gonna do auto trace versus center tracing, and then hit save. Then it has brought it in. It's kind of hard to see because we can just drag it over, and there is the actual vector of that bear. So I can select everything, put it on engrave. So I'm actually gonna select everything and then drop it on a different layer to make it a little bit easier to see. So unlike this one, if we zoom way in, you can see this is a bitmap versus with this one, if we zoom in, it is a vector, which gives you the ability to do our next tip. That is precision node editing. Normally what you do is you just double click a vector image and you can get into it. But a lot of times, especially if you do an image trace, you're gonna have to make this a compound vector. So I'm going to do that. Then I'm gonna jump in here, double click, and then all of the nodes have dropped in. And then you have like all of your like vector editing node tools, which are really handy. And just like with moving general things around the artboard, you can use your arrow keys with this as well as your shift key to quickly adjust nodes so you have the vector exactly the way you want it. All right, the next tip actually goes back to what you were just seeing. I have created a duplicate of this bear. I'm going to double click into it. And instead of adjusting the vectors individually, I can actually simplify the vector. And when I do that, I can hit auto simplify and you can see it is reducing it by half. Now, as you like crank this up, you're gonna lose more and more of the details to where like eventually it looks kind of weird. So like the 2 to 3 usually does an okay job. I'm gonna hit confirm and I'm gonna hit done. Now, what's nice about that is if I put all of these on different layers, sometimes a simplified vector will actually give you time savings in terms of how long it takes to engrave or especially cut out. So I'm gonna switch both of these over to score. I'm just gonna output the simplified one right here. And this is with the same speed and power settings. This is gonna give me a time of 3 minutes and 12 seconds versus if I just look at the other one, it's gonna give me a time of 4 minutes and 39 seconds. So you're gonna get some time savings, especially as it's following those outlines because there's less like slow down and speed ups as it's going around all of those different nodes. All right, the next one is super simple, but you're gonna use it a lot. And that is the simple shape tool over here. All of these have keyboard shortcuts. So circle especially is one I wind up using a ton, hitting C. And the tip is, like with most like editing software, if you hold shift, it's going to keep it a perfect circle. This is gonna be the same thing for the rectangle as well. You can make a rectangle, or if you hold shift, then it turns it into a perfect square. All right, the next tip, we are going to use our circle, and this is back with our original bear image, and we are going to do a mask. So let's say we want to put this on some type of ornament or some coin or whatever, but we want to mask out our image. Let's put my circle on top, and you can come over here and hit create mask. And when you do that, you can actually adjust where that circle is to further like define where the mask is gonna go. And if you double click back into it, you can always adjust that circle. So let's say we wanted to just have his face, you can hit done, good to go. Super easy way to make a mask. Now I'm gonna do the same thing just with a fully colored photo, just to make it a little bit easier to see. And you don't just have to do a circle, you really can do any shape. But for this one, let's say we want to do a rectangle or a square. Select both things, come over here to mask, and then just like before, we can adjust it as needed so that everything lines up the way that we want it. Not only can you do an image trace to get a vector, but it can actually automatically create layers that are based on the colors inside of that vector. So to show that, I'm just jumping over into their like AI art generator, and it's using one of these examples right here. And then I am coming over here to trace image just like before. And then as we are zooming in, we can see that we are getting shapes around everything that we want. And as always, we can adjust this. Now, xTool, if you're listening, one thing that would be great is if you could select the number of colors you want to include in the trace so that you're making sure that you're capturing everything that you need. That's something that you can do in Adobe Illustrator. That's really helpful when you're doing stuff like this, but this still more or less gets you what you are looking for. So I can now pull this over. I'm going to delete my actual image. Again, this is what we imported, so that is not the vector. But you can see right here, here are all of our different vectors, and they are different colors. So down here at the bottom, we have a blue, we have an orange, and a black. If I come over to the black and hit engrave, actually I'm gonna do engrave for all of these so you can see the different colors. It gave us 3 different colors. Now, we weren't able to pull the yellow from the middle, but we could go back in and adjust that as needed. And since these are individual layers, you can do different operations for each one. So maybe you want to actually cut out the black letters, but maybe you just want to do an engrave on the orange and the blue. You can adjust everything just like you normally would inside of the software. So for this next one, this is great if you're doing like stamps or stickers, basically something where you can create a custom outline around your artwork. So what I've done is I've just deleted everything from what we were just using. That's why it looks a little bit goofy over here. But what if I wanted to cut out this love, but instead of just doing like a circle or a square, I actually wanted it to follow the general shape of my object right here. We're gonna come over here and then we're gonna hit outline. We don't need an inner outline for the bitmap, but we are going to make this a little bit bigger so you can adjust this. What's nice is all of this merges together. So once we confirm it, this is the vector we can use to actually cut out this object. Again, we can assign this to a new layer. Then we can set our orange layer to cut and then our black to engrave, and we're going to be good to go. Our last vector tip is a super simple one, and that is, let's say we wanted to take this love, gonna make a copy, and then we wanna drop another one right down below, but we want our actual vectors to merge together. So we kinda wanna overlay it for whatever reason. If we do this and we go to process it, and if we actually run this, you can see we're going to cut things out that have already been cut out. What you want to do is use this combine menu over here. It gives you a bunch of different options, and especially this one right here, Unite, will actually combine all the vectors together. So if I double click into them, you can see all those points have been combined. But this menu is super helpful. You can do things like subtract or unite, and that's gonna be wherever these objects overlap. And then finally, you can subtract. So wherever everything's are overlapping, you're gonna take that out from the middle. And then again, if we double click in, this is an actual vector that we have created that then you can do whatever you need with. So for the next tip, you've been seeing it a little bit already, and it's the feature that a lot of people seem to be cramming into their software, and that is AI. Now to get to it, it's just this AI logo right here, and then it brings you into their ArtMind tool. Now this has been developing a good bit. Initially, it was just like an image generator that you might have seen before. They're giving the example of a bear and glasses, but what's really helpful is they're basically giving you some templates that are on the back end of your prompt that allow you to make things that are going to be pretty usable from the jump. So especially this text art right here. So this is one that I did a little bit earlier. This is the way from Star Wars, but maybe we want to do the May the Force be with you. And they give you some quick templates to be able to get you started. Now you could create all of these yourself, but you have to get pretty deep into knowing how like AI prompts work. So being able to do this and then generate it is really helpful. Now this one is kind of annoying because there is a cost on the back end of it for the processing. It's gonna take a little bit to process, but then once you've got it, you can either save it locally to the machine or just pull it directly into your canvas. And you're going to be good to go. Now I showed those image trace tips earlier because this is gonna bring it in as an image. So if you want to use it as an actual vector, again, we'll go through the image trace process like before. We can save it, pull it over, and as quick as that, we have an actual vector that we can use and cut things out. Now, the next tip is another AI generation method, and this is a face sketch. So this is really helpful if you're doing custom stuff for people where they want to put like a picture of themselves or like a picture of their kids or whatever onto some type of image. You can obviously just bring that bitmap image in and then you can put it in directly, but maybe you want to stylize it a little bit. So I have just uploaded a photo of Ewan McGregor as Obi-Wan Kenobi, and then I am going to generate, and you can see here's like one of the stylized images I've already got. This was like a picture of Tom Hanks, and the hands on there kind of made it a little bit goofy, so the likeness doesn't totally come through, but we'll see how well it does with this. All right, and this is our result, but you can tell it isn't just like a straight filter of the image we had. His hair is short now instead of long, so it's gonna take some fiddling with to get maybe what you want, but typically these are gonna be really great images to be able to convert into a vector. So again, coming over to image trace, we are going to trace it. I'm gonna make it really smooth. Hit save, pull it over, and delete this guy. And so we have a couple different layers. And so I might actually just hide the purple layer and just keep it strong with this. And there we have an image we can blow up or scale down or do whatever you want like you would with a vector. Let's talk about finding settings to engrave or cut something out. So if we wanted to engrave Obi-Wan out, what would be the best settings if we are using something like basswood, which is what I have in the machine right now. So I'm gonna come up here to the top. I'm going to hit 3mm basswood. You can bring in other materials. And what's nice about that is they have a lot of pre-saved settings. So let's say we are working with 3mm plywood. You're gonna get a lot of different options for settings that you can bring in. So you can see these are adjusted. And then what's really nice, and the tip for this, is it's giving you a material grid. And I did not realize for a while that this is selectable, specifically inside of the software. So I am going to switch this over to basswood. I'm gonna hit confirm. Then I am going to select this guy, hit engrave, and then open this up. And you can see that test grid here at the bottom. But if you click that, then you're actually able to highlight the one that you want to use. So I can click this. Let's say this is the one that I actually want to do. And our settings adjust to 30 and 200, and you are good to go. Now, with that being said, I would still recommend you guys running some custom test files on your own. The next tip I actually covered a couple videos ago, and that is a material test array. But what's nice about it is instead of just doing like a square or a circle that you see a lot, you can do it with pretty much anything. So I made this Obi-Wan face a compound vector. I'm gonna come over here to their apps and hit material test array. And you can see we are getting a bunch of different Obi-Wan heads, and then we can run on the machine. And I always find this is gonna be your best bet for dialing in material settings specific to the artwork that you are using. Now, this isn't so much as a tip, but I definitely want to point you to my own custom test files if you guys would like to use them, to where not only do I give you like your normal engrave and cut test files with squares, but I'm giving you image test files that are actually using an image, Baby Yoda, as well as a vector engrave test files that are using a vector logo, and then a bunch of different tests that especially allow you to dial in your image settings, because there are a lot of settings for that, including what type of processing of the bitmap you're doing, and even like what resolution are you running your machine at. Right, next up is a setting you definitely want to make sure you use if you want to cut something out with the exact dimensions that you need. So I'm going to come up here and make a rectangle, or actually we're going to make it a square, and it's going to go around his face. I'm going to center it real quick. This actually isn't the tip, but you have this aligned center right here. So that drops it in perfectly. And then let's say for this square, you've got the dimensions right there. I want to have this right at 5.5 by 5.5. Editor Brandon here. I just realized when I went in to change these dimensions, that 5.5 is actually in the X and the Y, so I'm like moving it in the workspace. What I meant to do was change the actual dimensions of the box to 5.5 inches so that when we cut it out, we're getting exactly 5.5. This principle still applies, just know I just put these in wrong, so sorry about that. One thing you want to make sure and use, as I set this to a cut layer, and then I jump into here, is that you are using a kerf offset. And then all the kerf is the width of the laser beam as you're cutting something out. So if you actually want to have it 5.5 inches, you don't want to run the laser directly on the line because the kerf is going to push a little bit into your material. So you want to offset it to the outside, so whatever you cut out is exactly the right dimension. So to do that, just make sure and flip this on, and then you can have a compensation width. And to figure that out, you can actually test it, or you can just check on the actual product page. Just know this is going to be dependent on wattage. So an S1 40 watt is going to be a thicker beam than an S1 20 watt. But once you have that, you're going to have that compensation. And then when you go to cut something out, it'll make sure and adjust for you. Our next step has to do with getting the design exactly where you want on the material. So especially with circles or like irregular shaped objects, that can be kind of hard. It's easier if you have a camera and you can visually look at it, but sometimes you don't have it completely locked in. So the S1 does not have a camera. If you use this process, you don't need a camera anyways. So I've got my circle in there. All right, so we are going to be engraving his head, and then I am going to go to this mark processing area. Before, they just had this as has 2 points, so like a rectangle, but now you can do a circle, a polygon, or even a line. So very, very useful. We're gonna hit on circle, I'm gonna start marking, and the process, all it is you are physically going to move your laser head to get 3 points around this circle. Once I've got my first point, I'm going to mark it. I'm gonna come over here, mark my next one. And I'm using the red crosshairs that are always on when the machine is on. Then we are going to end our marking, and we've got our circle. Now what that does is it visually shows you inside of this artboard where your material is. So now I can select this and then move it over. You can see I've got snapping turned on, so that drops it right in the middle. So I can actually blow this up. So now if I come over here to frame, and frame, you can see we are right in the middle, and we're gonna be good to go to do our engrave. All right, our next tip also has to do with positioning, but this time with the M1 Ultra and using our camera to get an image of what is inside of the workspace. So I'm gonna drop this in. And to do this, you're gonna click on Obtain Background, and it's going to ask you to send an image from the app itself. So I've got xTool Creative Space opened up. All you have to do is you create a project, hit a new project. I'm gonna hit Snapshot Preview. Got it, then I'm gonna go over and take a picture. And then I can either insert it into the canvas and use everything directly from my phone, or I can send it to the computer. And this is where I'm gonna use that QR code it was just asking about. And now I've got it sent in there, and you can see we've got his head right where we want it. You can do this with the S1 as well, but this was a process they came out with after they started shipping. So you actually print out the little stickers on the sides that the M1 Ultra just has built in directly. All right, the next tip has to do with a machine setting, and that is that beep you hear every time it wants you to do something. So you can actually turn that on or off. And to get to that, you just hit this gear icon right here to open up our device settings and jump into our working info. So the buzzer reminder right here, I always wind up turning off just because that starts to get annoying after a while. But then you can also adjust the exhaust time once your machine is done running, and also if you have an exhaust fan that you want to turn on. The next tip is also in the device settings under the working info, and this has to do with engraving. For probably safety-ish reasons, xTool automatically has an air assist turned on when you're doing engraving. Typically you want no air assist on because that's gonna give you the best result. Under the working info, you can actually adjust the auto adjust on the air assist. Now that might just be specific to the S1 and probably the P2 because that's built in, but you have an auto setting on your air assist as well as the ability to adjust how hard it's going. So if it's set to auto, this is where you adjust those settings. So I always have engraved turn to 0. The next tip has to do with what you actually output to send to the machine to cut out and engrave. So I'm gonna open up my layer panel, and I have all of these OB1 heads on different layers, as well as a frame that is going to cut out. So let's say I want to engrave these one at a time. You can select the entire layer and you have an output right up here on the top right. Just turn that to off. So maybe we just want to do the orange and we are good to go. Now the next tip dives down deeper into the processing because not only can you do the processing at the entire layer level, but you can do it at the individual object level. This is really handy if maybe something didn't quite cut or engrave that you want, but you don't want to run the entire process again. You can turn things on and off individually. So right now I am going to turn my orange layer completely off, so nothing is going to output. If I just want to do his head, I can hit output, and then you can see when I go to process, we actually have just one head coming out. And if I want to go even deeper than that, I can release my compound vector. So I'm going to ungroup it, and maybe I just want to output this part of the hair because that is now an individual vector. If I go to processing, maybe that didn't cut out for whatever reason, you can send just that element to your machine. Our next tip has to do with moving around with your machine. So you can definitely just push this around, and you can see as I'm doing that, my red crosshair is adjusting. But maybe you want to make some fine adjustments to the movement of the machine. Under the framing, there is a little hamburger menu. If you click on that, you're going to get your jog controls. Either this hasn't been here or I just found it the other day. So you'll find your normal jog controls, which are handy. And then you can also adjust the distance of the jog, and you can move the Z-axis as well. This is also where you can adjust the framing speed. Maybe it's taking super long to go around something. You can crank this all the way up. You can also just crank your jog speed up too, so it moves much quicker than what we had before. And to bring us all the way back to the beginning with time savings to see how much time something is going to take to cut or engrave. You probably have already seen this already, but whenever you hit process, you're gonna have the time down here. I find this is really helpful, even if the exact amount isn't quite right. If I want to make adjustments to whatever I'm doing, maybe I wanna speed things up, slow things down, simplify my vectors, or just make a bunch of the adjustments that we've talked about. You could just do that on a separate canvas, go to process, and you can see what the time difference is going to be to hopefully give you the best results in the most amount of time. Another tip with processing is how it actually is going to process your image, meaning like what is it going to engrave and when. They've done a pretty good job with their algorithm to make it faster and faster, but you can adjust it if you need to. So you can come over here to processing path and click user defined, and you're gonna get a bunch of settings from there. One that is really helpful is maybe you wanna run all of these by layer. And this is really helpful because it's gonna go in the exact order that you have made the layers. So if I ran this right now, my frame layer is at the bottom. So the frame layer is also going to be the last thing that is run. You can see it's running all the tests, and then we do the frame at the end. And then if I just drag this to the top, go to process, run it, you can see the frame runs first, and then it does everything else. And when you're cutting things out, it's always good to do that cutout at the very end because your material can shift or some of the internal warping can adjust once it gets fully removed from your material. And normally it does that with the auto planning, but sometimes it doesn't. So that's how you can get in there and turn that off if you need to. So that is all 30 plus one bonus tip. Let me know how many you got down below in the comments, as well as any tips that you might have that I didn't hit that you think would be helpful to other people. All right, until next time, go make or break something in your shop. See you guys.